Welcome, curious minds, to AI History of Western Philosophy. Today, we're embarking on a journey across millennia, really, and asking a question that seems, well, frankly, impossible at first glance. Can the profound, really abstract insights of a 5th century BCE Greek philosopher, can they actually connect with these, the mathematical intricacies of 21st century physics? What if ancient wisdom, something derived from just pure reason, held a surprising foresight into the very nature of reality, time, change? As understood by someone like, well, Albert Einstein. It sounds pretty wild, I know.
It is a bold claim, definitely, and one that really challenges our standard view of intellectual history, doesn't it? But our mission today here on AI History of Western Philosophy is to explore exactly that, this provocative idea that the pre-Socratic philosopher Melissus of Samos often kind of dismissed, right? Seen as a historical footnote.
Yeah.
But he actually anticipated core concepts of modern space-time physics. And in doing that, we're going to see how Aristotle's historically dominant critique of Melissus might, well, in light of modern science, be considered maybe unfounded.
Exactly. We're going to peel back the layers, hopefully, and illuminate these deep recurring structures in humanity's, well, unending quest to grasp the fundamental nature of reality. So, to give you a bit of a roadmap for this journey, we'll start by reconstructing Melissus's unique vision. It's often misunderstood, isn't it? This vision of reality as an infinite motionless unity. Then we'll dive deep into Aristotle's powerful critiques, which are rooted in his, staunch empiricism and his absolute rejection of what he famously called the actual infinite. Finally, and this is where it gets really mind-bending, we'll introduce the concept of Einstein's block universe and discover how it remarkably, uncannily almost, echoes Melissus's ancient insights. And that forces us to reevaluate who might have been, closer to the truth about existence all along. It's a bit of a philosophical detective story, isn't it? Okay, let's jump right into part one. The being of Melissus, an infinite and motionless unity. To really get this, to appreciate how revolutionary his thought was and how it connects, maybe surprisingly, with modern physics, we first need to understand the precise nature of Melissus's being, or in Greek. I always sort of thought of the Eleatics as this monolithic block, Parmenides, Zeno, Melissus, all the same thing. But his philosophy is actually far from a simple copy. It's a sophisticated development, isn't it? Marked by logical rigor and some really radical conclusions.
You're absolutely right to flag that distinction. Melissus of Samos, 5th century BCE philosopher, maybe even a military commander according to some sources, he stands as the third major figure of the Eleatic school, right after Parmenides and Zeno. Now, it's definitely worth noting that both ancient commentators, and many modern ones too, including Aristotle himself, often just dismissed Melissus, called him crude or eristic, just arguing for the sake of it. They suggested he just restated Parmenides' vision, maybe in a less elegant way. But as we'll see, this assessment really overlooks his critical innovations.
Okay, so what were those innovations? Because when I think of Parmenides, it's that dense metaphorical poetry, right? And Zeno, of course, with his paradoxes that still kind of make my head spin. So how did Melissus stand apart? And why did that make him such a clear target for someone as systematic as Aristotle?
That's a great question. Unlike Parmenides' poetry or Zeno's mind games, Melissus presented his arguments in incredibly clear, systematic, ionic prose. This wasn't just about style, it made his philosophy much more accessible. And crucially, for a critic like Aristotle, who was very systematic, it became a much more distinct, precise target for refutation. He laid his arguments out, step by step almost, demanding a direct, logical response, not just metaphorical interpretation.
I see, okay. And it seems his biggest break from Parmenides was about the scope of being. Parmenides, in his poem, described what is as perfected on every side, like the bulk of a well-rounded sphere, which sounds very finite, contained. But Melissus rejected that.
Precisely. That well-rounded sphere strongly implies finitude, a limit. Melissus, however, broke decisively with this. He argued that being must be unlimited, or apeiron. Not just in time, meaning it has no beginning or end, it's eternal, but also, and this was radical, in its spatial magnitude, infinite in space as well, a profound extension.
And this wasn't just space, it extended to time itself, too, which I found really fascinating. I always thought Parmenides was already radical with his timeless now, basically saying past and future are illusions. But Melissus took it a step further. He saw being as everlasting, existing through this infinite succession of moments, stretching always into the past and always into the future. This wasn't just a minor tweak, was it? You argue it was a profound logical correction.
That's a crucial point, yes, because Parmenides' finite sphere, It creates a real logical problem, doesn't it? What lies beyond the boundary? If there's something else, well, then being isn't truly one, which Parmenides insisted it was. But if there's nothing non-being, then being is limited by non-being. And Parmenides himself argued non-being was unthinkable, unsayable. Melissus's idea of an infinite being elegantly resolves this. By making being boundless, he gets rid of that problematic concept of a limit. It makes the whole monistic system the idea that reality is fundamentally one, unchanging, indivisible, more logically coherent, more self-contained. So his philosophy, yeah, it really represents a critical development, not just a repeat. He genuinely advanced the Eleatic program.
Okay, so if the Melissus's ideas were such a logical progression, the next question is, how did he get there? He used this meticulous chain of deductions, right? What we're calling the logic of the unlimited. And all his argument for the properties of being flowed from that core Eleatic principle, ex nihilo nihil fit, something cannot come from nothing.
Exactly. His argument for eternal existence, temporal infinity, is actually twofold. It addresses both the past and the future. First, he reasoned, whatever comes to be must have a beginning. What is didn't come to be from nothing, therefore it has no beginning. It's always existed. Pretty straightforward deduction. Second, he argued, whatever has a beginning must also have an end. What is has no beginning, therefore it won't have an end, it will always exist. Put them together and you get the conclusion that being is truly everlasting.
But here's where it gets really interesting and often, contentious. That connection he makes between temporal infinity and spatial infinity. In one of his key fragments, fragment 6, Melissus says something like, whatever has a beginning and end is neither eternal nor unlimited. Being has no beginning or end, therefore it is eternal and unlimited. And he takes it further, deducing unity from this unlimitedness. If there were two or more things, they'd limit each other, right? So a truly unlimited being can only be one. It's a very tight chain. But I can almost hear Aristotle sharpening his logical knives at this point.
You're not wrong. That jump, that connection between temporal and spatial infinity, has historically been a major point of attack. Aristotle, later critics, they called it a logical fallacy. Equivocation, basically. They'd say beginning in time is different from beginning in space, and you can't just leap from one to the other like that. However, this criticism assumes that space and time are fundamentally separate categories, right? Independent things.
Which is fascinating, because there's this alternative reading, isn't there, that Melissus might be operating under a different, maybe unstated, metaphysical assumption, like existence itself is a unified whole, and its basic properties, limitedness, unlimitedness, they have to apply holistically across everything. From that viewpoint, beginning and end aren't just temporal or spatial markers, they're general signs of finitude, applying to reality as a whole. So his argument is less a flawed syllogism, Aristotelian style, and more a profound claim about unified reality. A claim you might be surprised to hear that resonates really unexpectedly with unified spacetime in modern physics. It's like he was thinking in spacetime terms before spacetime.
Absolutely. And moving on, Melissus's radical logic also led him to profound conclusions about the very stuff of existence, specifically the absence of void and therefore motion. This brings us to the plenum, a universe without void or motion. His argument for being's motionlessness is a direct, stark, powerful consequence of denying the void.
Right, and this is where it really clicks. Melissus reasoned, to be empty is to be nothing. What is nothing doesn't exist. Since the one being exists, it can't be empty. And if something isn't empty, it must be full. A plenum, therefore, the one is full. It's just step, step, step. No room to breathe, let alone move.
And from that conclusion, that reality is a plenum, completely full. The impossibility of motion follows necessarily. He stated, whatever has motion is not full. Whatever is full must be motionless. Therefore, the one is motionless. Think about it. Motion is impossible because there's simply no empty place for any part of being to move into. There's no gap, no space to shift around in.
But the irony here is huge, isn't it? The influence this argument had, indirectly, on what came next. By explicitly saying motion would require a retreat into the empty, Melissus, while trying to banish motion from physics, actually established the void as a necessary precondition for motion. It's like he built the theoretical framework for his opponents. This opened the conceptual door for the very first atomists, Leucippus, who was supposedly Melissus's own student, and Democritus.
Yes, exactly. They just inverted his reductio ad absurdum. Melissa said, if motion, then void. No void, therefore no motion. Eusebius and Democritus looked around, saw motion and change everywhere, undeniably, and said, okay, motion exists, therefore the void must exist. Melissus's denial of the void was pivotal. It was so logically tight, it couldn't just be ignored. It had to be answered. And that answer directly shaped the next couple of millennia of physical thought by leading straight to classical atomism. Indivisible atoms and the void separating them. Quite the unintended legacy.
Okay, this brings us to maybe Melissus's most radical move. And in our context today, the most forward-looking one. In the incorporeal one, Melissus argues that the one is incorporeal. It has no body. The argument, preserved by Simplicius, goes something like, the one is whole in and of itself, therefore the one has no parts, therefore the one has no thickness, therefore the one does not have a body. But wait. Spatially infinite, yet no body. That's a massive conceptual leap. How do we even begin to wrap our minds around that in a Greek context? What does that even mean?
It is a profound challenge, especially for Greek thought. How can something be spatially infinite but have no body? In Greek philosophy, a body, a soma, intrinsically implies having parts, being divisible, having thickness, materiality. So an infinite, incorporeal being. It can't be like some gigantic physical object, an endless block of marble or something. That just contradicts his own deductions about it being partless.
So instead, you have to think of it as something way more abstract, like a fundamental field, maybe, or a pure geometric structure. It's spatially extended, yeah, it fills all of reality, but it's not made of anything material. It's just pure, undifferentiated, partless existence itself.
And here's where we start seeing that bridge to modern physics. It feels like he was onto something we only recently found the language for.
Exactly. Because the space-time of general relativity is precisely this kind of thing. A real, physically consequential extended entity, a four-dimensional manifold that is not itself a material body or object. Instead, it is the geometric structure within which material bodies exist and move. Melissus's incorporeal infinite plenum. It's arguably the closest a pre-Socratic philosopher, working with the concepts he had available, could possibly come to articulating the idea of a non-material geometric reality, like the space-time manifold. It's a pretty striking premonition, really, for 2,500 years ago. All right, so we've journeyed through Melissus's intricate and surprisingly modern-sounding ideas. Now it's time for his most formidable critic, Aristotle. We're calling this section Aristotle's counterattack, deconstructing Eleatic monism. And Aristotle's engagement here, it wasn't just a detached philosophical chat, was it? It was really a comprehensive defense of his whole scientific and metaphysical project, rooted in empirical observation, rejecting things like the actual infinite, things he thought made a true science of nature impossible. He had a lot riding on this.
Indeed. Aristotle's primary strategy, really, when dealing with the Eleatics, was to basically frame their whole position as being outside the proper domain of natural philosophy or physis. He defined the subject of physics as nature itself. And nature, for Aristotle, is fundamentally a source or cause of being moved and of being at rest. It's about change and stability.
So by denying the reality of motion, change, plurality, which is exactly what Parmenides and Melissus did, they were, in Aristotle's view, effectively denying the foundational axioms of the very science they claimed to practice. So their inquiry wasn't a contribution to physics, it was a rejection of it, which is why Aristotle often dismissed their arguments as eristic or contentious, like they were just trying to win, not find truth. He found Melissus's reasoning gross, impalpable, unsophisticated, easily dismissed. He was basically saying, you're not even doing science, you're not even in the right ballpark.
That's a perfect way to put it. And underlying that dismissal was this fundamental methodological disagreement, a real epistemological chasm. Aristotle insisted inquiry must start with and be accountable to sense experience. Melissus, on the other hand, pure reason was the only judge. The senses were fundamentally unreliable, showing us illusions. This clash wasn't minor. It was a collision of entire scientific paradigms. Aristotle was laying down the rules for a valid science of nature, one that had to explain the world we see and touch. The Eleatic project, especially Melissus's clear prose version, was purely rationalist. Start with a priori principles, follow the logic, even if it wildly contradicts what you see. So Aristotle's dismissal of Melissus as unscientific was, a jurisdictional claim rooted in this deep difference about how we know things.
Okay, but beyond just saying you're not doing physics, Aristotle also rolled up his sleeves and used his logical toolkit to take apart Melissus's arguments directly. This leads us to logical and methodological critiques. His most famous charge is that Melissus commits the formal fallacy of denying the antecedent. He argued that from what has come into being always has a beginning. Melissus wrongly infers the inverse. What has not come into being has no beginning. as the if P then Q, not P, therefore not Q error, right? Could you give us a quick simple example so we really get what that means?
Sure. Think of it like this. If it's raining P, then the ground is wet, Q. Okay. Now, if you know it's not raining, not P, you absolutely cannot logically conclude, therefore the ground is not wet, not Q. Someone might have just used a hose. Melissus, Aristotle argued, made a similar invalid leap regarding beginnings. He also hammered that crucial jump Melissus made from temporal infinity to spatial infinity, calling it unsupported, based on ambiguity in beginning and end. And furthermore, Aristotle objected to Melissus' premise that all change requires a beginning. He pointed out some changes like, say, suddenly acquiring a new quality can happen all at once, no distinct starting part or moment needed.
Right. Now, it's important to say these critiques sound devastating from an Aristotelian logic perspective. But maybe they didn't fully engage with what Melissus was actually trying to do. As we discussed, Melissus's arguments could be read more as deep metaphysical deductions, not strict syllogisms. That temporal-spatial link might be a metaphysical axiom about unity. His claims about beginnings and maybe assertions about finitude itself. So was Aristotle just being overly pedantic, or was there a deeper reason he picked the logic apart like this?
That's a crucial nuance. While Melissus's arguments might fail as formal logic within Aristotle's strict system, they could function coherently within a different, more holistic metaphysical framework. A framework Aristotle's analytical approach just wasn't really designed to fully engage with. His critique is perfectly valid on his own terms, emphasizing empirical data and granular analysis. But it might not be a fully charitable assessment of Melissus's intent, which was operating on a different, more abstract philosophical level, trying to deduce fundamental truths a priori.
Okay. Now, perhaps the most impactful, historically decisive objection Aristotle made, and it's a cornerstone of his own philosophy, is his distinction between potential and actual infinity. This is the problem of the actual infinite.
Right. Aristotle accepted potential infinity. That's a process you can continue indefinitely, like counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, you can always add one more. Or dividing a line segment. You can keep dividing it smaller and smaller forever. You never complete the infinite process. But he vehemently rejected the existence of an actual infinite, a completed, determinate, coexisting infinite totality. For Aristotle, an actual infinite was just logically and physically impossible. He famously argued it would mean something bigger than the heavens, which is absurd.
And he slots Melissus's infinite being right into that illicit actual infinite category. In his physics, Aristotle argued, look, if being is infinite like Melissus says, it must be a quantity. But for Aristotle, things like substance or quality can't be infinite in themselves, only accidentally by being attributes of an infinite quantity. And since an actual infinite quantity can't exist, boom, Melissus's being is impossible. That sounds like a total shutdown for Melissus.
It absolutely was, for centuries. This objection proved decisive for over 2 millennia, cementing the view that Melissus's philosophy was just fundamentally untenable. However, and this is huge, this is the very point most directly overturned by modern science and mathematics. In the 19th century, Georg Cantor's set theory provided a rigorous mathematical foundation for the actual infinite. He showed how to work logically with infinite sets as completed wholes, like the set of all natural numbers.
Wow, so modern math basically proved Aristotle wrong about the actual infinite. And today, modern cosmology, physics, they routinely use actual infinities, right? We talk about the potential infinite size of the universe, infinite dimensional Hilbert spaces in quantum mechanics, and yes, the block universe model we'll get to, it's a type of actual infinite itself. So Aristotle's entire refutation of Melissus, based on the impossibility of the actual infinite, it's built on a premise that's just not considered valid anymore in math and physics. This seems like the strongest evidence for our claim that his critique might be unfounded from a modern perspective. That's a massive turning point in this philosophical mystery. It really is. Now, finally, in the world of substance and change, Aristotle attacks the internal coherence of monism itself. He argued strict monism is self-refuting. You can't even articulate it coherently. Think about it. Any statement about being, like being is one, predicates a property oneness of a substance being. If the property is different from the substance, bam, you've got plurality being and oneness contradicting monism. If the property is identical to the substance, then the statement being is one is just a meaningless tautology, like saying being is being. It's a clever logical trap. He also drew that distinction between being one in form and one in matter. He said, okay, maybe being is one in its underlying stuff, but it can't be one in form. Look around. A man is different from a horse, right? Manifest differences in form. And to counter motionlessness, he used the example of water. A continuous unity, like a pool of water, can still move within itself like a vortex. Unity doesn't automatically mean no motion. He sounds like he had a pretty solid defense on these points, too.
These arguments from predication and common sense physics, they are logically sophisticated, no doubt. They pose a serious challenge to any monistic theory. But it's important to remember they rely entirely on Aristotle's own elaborate metaphysical framework: substance, form, accident. Melissus' radical monism, this single, homogeneous, incorporeal plenum, was likely intended to reject that very framework wholesale. In a reality that's partless, undifferentiated, the distinction between a thing and its properties might just not apply in the way Aristotle assumes.
And the vortex example. Clever, but maybe it misses the mark. It targets a weaker kind of unity than Melissus posits. A vortex has differentiated parts, right? Water moving at different speeds, different directions. Melissus's being is supposed to be absolutely homogeneous, partless, everywhere alike. So Aristotle's counterexample, while effective against some kinds of unity, might be misdirected here. It doesn't quite hit the radical core of the Eleatic claim. A powerful critique, but maybe not the knockout blow he thought. Okay, let's jump forward quite a bit. A few millennia, actually. To really reevaluate this ancient clash between Melissus and Aristotle, we absolutely have to bring in the huge shifts in how we understand reality from modern physics. We're now diving into the view from space-time modern physics and the nature of reality.
And at the heart of this modern view is Einstein's theory of general relativity, GR, published back in 1915. This theory represents one of the most profound shifts, really, in the history of science. Building on his 1905 special relativity, GR just completely dismantled the old classical worldview.
Yeah.
The picture of objects moving through passive absolute space across independent absolute time, gone. Instead, Einstein showed space and time are inextricably interwoven. They form a single dynamic four-dimensional continuum, spacetime.
Right, and the core idea of GR is that gravity isn't some mysterious force acting through space. It is the geometry of spacetime itself. The physicist John Archibald Wheeler had that great summary: matter tells spacetime how to curve, and curved spacetime tells matter how to move. Massive things, like stars, planets, they literally warp the geometric fabric of spacetime around them. And other things, planets orbiting even light photons, they then follow trajectories. Geodesics, physicists call them, along this curvature. What we feel as gravity is just moving along the straightest possible path in a curved geometry. It's like the universe's hidden architecture.
And this geometric view of reality, it has radical consequences that hit right at the heart of our ancient philosophical debate. One is the relativity of simultaneity. There's no universal now everyone agrees on. Whether two distant events happen at the same time totally depends on your motion. Another is gravitational time dilation. Gravity actually affects time's flow. Clocks tick slower in stronger gravitational fields. It's been measured.
Wow, this complete dissolution of absolute space and absolute time, the very bedrock of Aristotelian and Newtonian physics, is just fundamental here, isn't it? Any philosophical critique, like Aristotle's, that relies on the intuitive separateness of space, time, substance, it's operating within a now obsolete physical paradigm. This directly impacts how we see Aristotle's charge that Melissus linking temporal and spatial infinity was just a logical fallacy. In a unified space-time, those properties are intrinsically linked. Melissus's connection starts to look less arbitrary, maybe even insightful. It's like he was seeing the forest when everyone else was stuck on the trees.
And this brings us to one of the most startling philosophical implications of GR, the block universe, or eternalism. We'll explore this in the block universe. And Eleatic echo.
Yes.
This interpretation takes relativity's implications to their logical conclusion. If there's no privileged universal present moment, then the ontological difference between past, present, and future seems to be just an artifact of our consciousness, not a fundamental feature of reality itself.
Okay, let me see if I'm picturing this right. The universe isn't flowing through time. It just is.
Right.
It's like a giant static block. Past, present, future, all equally real, like frames on a movie reel. All events, Earth forming, Caesar crossing the Rubicon. This exact moment, right now, even the universe's eventual heat death, they all coexist with equal reality in one big four-dimensional block of space-time. So from this perspective, the universe as a whole is static, unchanging. The flow of time is like profoundly an illusion. Our consciousness just experiences successive slices or moments of this pre-existing 4D reality as we trace our path, our world line through it. And this is where Melissus suddenly starts to look less like an ancient footnote and more like, well, a visionary, maybe.
Precisely. And here's where the parallels between this modern physical metaphysical model and Melissus's ancient conception of being become truly striking, profound even. We're talking deep structural similarities between a 2,500-year-old metaphysical system derived from pure reason and a modern physical model derived from advanced math and empirical tests.
Let's lay them out side by side, because it really is quite remarkable. First, temporality. Melissus described being as eternal everlasting, infinite moments, no beginning or end. How does the block universe compare?
The block universe similarly holds that all time coexists. The time dimension is just a complete axis of the manifold. Past, present, future are all equally real, fixed.
Okay. Then spatiality. Melissus argued for a spatially infinite, unlimited being, Aperon. No spatial boundary.
And the space-time manifold, well, it's a four-dimensional geometric structure containing all of space. Its ultimate extent in modern cosmology is still debated, often implying infinitude, or at least being unbounded, having no edge.
For motion and change, Melissus insisted being was motionless, unchanging. As a complete, full whole, it can't move or change. Local change is illusion.
The block universe is globally static. The 4D block itself doesn't change or move. Local motion is just represented as a static pattern, a world line within the block. The block itself is perfectly still, a completed whole.
What about unity? Melissus's being is one unified, a single, continuous, homogeneous whole. If there were two, they'd limit each other.
And the block universe is seen as a single manifold. All of reality is contained within a single, unified, four-dimensional space-time continuum.
In substance, Melissus said his one was incorporeal, partless, no body, parts, thickness, pure, undifferentiated existence.
This finds a striking parallel in the block universe's geometric structure. Space-time isn't material substance itself, but a geometric entity whose properties, its curvature, govern matter and energy within it. It's the stage, not the actors.
Finally, their ontological status. For Melissus, being was true reality, the ultimate reality known only by reason, contrasting with the illusory sensory world.
For the block universe, it's considered fundamental reality, the fundamental arena of physics, a mathematical structure underlying the perceived world of objects and change. This comparison really makes the core hypothesis tangible, doesn't it? How a purely rational deduction from antiquity resonates so strongly with a cutting-edge physical model.
Now, hold on. Before we start thinking the debate's totally settled and Melissus was just right, it's crucial to acknowledge the block universe isn't universally accepted, is it? Surely it's not that simple. This brings us to challenges to the static universe. The nature of time is one of the hottest, most fiercely debated areas in philosophy of physics today.
You're right, it's far from settled. A major objection to the block universe is its failure to really account for our powerful, undeniable, subjective experience of time passing. For us, there's a huge difference between the fixed past and the open future. The block universe, saying all time is equally real, struggles to explain this very basic human experience. Plus, there's the second law of thermodynamics, that irreversible increase of entropy, the arrow of time, order to disorder that's also hard to square with a fundamentally time-symmetric static block.
And some prominent physicists are pushing back hard, right? Championing alternative views. Lee Smolin, for instance, argues time is real, fundamental. Maybe the laws of physics themselves evolve. He talks about a thick present. Carlo Rovelli, too, with his relational quantum mechanics, suggests reality isn't a static block, but an evolving network of interactions. Time and space are relational, not absolute.
Exactly. And beyond that, some theorists, like Avshalom Elitzur, argue certain quantum phenomena might directly challenge the block model, supporting an objective passage of time. What's truly remarkable, though, is how this modern debate in philosophy of physics, eternalism, block universe, versus various forms of process physics, presentism, growing block, is a direct descendant, albeit much more sophisticated, of that ancient Greek debate. The static monism of the Eleatics, Parmenides, Melissus, versus the universal flux of Heraclitus, the same fundamental questions about static reality versus fundamental change just keep coming back millennia later. It really makes you pause.
It is humbling, isn't it? Thinking these ancient minds, with so much less data, were wrestling with the very same cosmic puzzles we are today. Okay, this brings us to synthesis and reevaluation. By bringing together Melissus's deep philosophy, Aristotle's sharp critiques, and these mind-bending ideas from modern physics, we can now try to offer a direct, nuanced assessment of our original question. And the result seems to be a significant reevaluation of both Melissus's ideas and Aristotle's famous refutation.
Indeed. When you look at it through the lens of modern physics, especially the block universe idea, several of Aristotle's most powerful critiques against Melissus look, well, significantly weakened, maybe even undermined entirely. First, let's revisit the actual infinite. As we establish, Aristotle's flat-out rejection of it was key to his reputation, but that premise is invalidated by modern math and physics. A cosmology based on a determinate, actual infinite isn't considered absurd or unscientific anymore. The block universe is an actual infinite, essentially. This removes the main logical and physical barrier that made Melissus's system seem untenable for so long.
Right. Then there's the temporal spatial link. Aristotle charged Melissus with a logical fallacy for linking these, based on separating space and time. But from a unified space-time perspective, these properties are deeply connected. An entity that's eternal, infinite in time, and spatially infinite. That's perfectly coherent within this framework. Melissus's old intuition starts to look less like a fallacy and more like a profound, maybe pre-scientific insight into the unified nature of the physical stage. It seems the universe just needed us to catch up to his thinking.
And finally, Melissus's insistence on motionlessness. Aristotle famously argued a motionless reality was impossible, contradicted all experience. But the block universe model gives us a coherent physical framework for a reality that is globally static, motionless, yet contains the appearance of local motion and change as static patterns, world lines within its structure. So this modern concept directly undermines Aristotle's common sense objection.
Okay, so it sounds like Melissus is almost completely vindicated. But hang on. Surely not all of Aristotle's critiques just crumble away. What's the most resilient objection? The one that still has philosophical bite, even now.
That's a crucial point. No, not all of Aristotle's critiques are nullified. The most resilient one is what we call the problem of plurality. Aristotle's arguments about predication, about the obvious diversity of the world, men, horses, hot, cold, all that stuff. Those arguments still carry considerable force. The block universe, yes, it's unified as a single manifold, but it contains an immense amount of structure and information. It is, importantly, a differentiated unity filled with a near-infinite plurality of distinct events and world lines.
And that stands in contrast to Melissus, because based on the fragments we have, he seems to argue for a completely homogeneous, undifferentiated being. Everywhere alike, no parts. It's hard to reconcile the rich, structured complexity of our universe, even as a static 4D block, with that radical, partless homogeneity Melissus described. So modern physics doesn't really support a reality that's just one featureless blob.
Exactly. And this leads us to a crucial distinction. Modern physics, particularly the block universe, offers a potential analog for Melissus's cosmology, the overall structure of reality. Single, eternal, infinite, static. However, it does not seem to support his strict metaphysical monism, the claim that the very substance of this reality is perfectly undifferentiated, homogeneous. The space-time manifold isn't homogeneous, it's curved, warped by mass energy. It contains a rich plurality of distinct events. Therefore, while Aristotle's critique of Melissus's cosmology is significantly weakened by modern physics, his critique of Melissus's strict monism still retains much of its philosophical power. It's a nuanced outcome, not a simple win for either side.
This whole investigation into Melissus, Aristotle, space-time, it really reveals something profound about the enduring power of fundamental questions, doesn't it? That's the enduring power of the question. The questions the pre-Socratics posed about being, time, change, the one and the many, they're not obsolete at all. They are, in fact, the very same questions being asked right now at the frontiers of theoretical physics, from quantum gravity to cosmology.
Absolutely. Contemporary physicists like Carlo Rovelli explicitly acknowledge this lineage. His work on loop quantum gravity, which radically questions the nature of time itself, is a direct continuation of the inquiry started by thinkers like Anaximander, Heraclitus, and, the Eleatics. And Rovelli's defense of Aristotelian physics, saying it was empirically successful within its own domain, also encourages a more charitable, context-sensitive reading of historical science. It gives us a lens to productively re-examine Melissus.
It's fascinating how physics and philosophy keep circling back to these same deep mysteries. It shows that what looks like a logical fallacy or a physical impossibility in one scientific era can maybe appear as a fundamental truth in another. It's not just about proving someone right or wrong, is it? It's about understanding how knowledge itself evolves.
Precisely. Metaphysical frameworks, like those from Melissus or Aristotle, aren't just right or wrong in some absolute timeless way. They're conceptual systems. Their plausibility, their coherence, it can be reevaluated, transformed as our physical understanding evolves. General Relativity doesn't prove Melissus was right. Rather, it gives us a new conceptual language, a new model of reality, where his once absurd ideas suddenly look coherent, insightful, surprisingly modern.
So as we wrap up this episode of AI History of Western Philosophy, we've journeyed through millennia, haven't we? From ancient Greek reason to modern physics complex equations. We've seen how the core tenets of Melissus being its eternal, infinite, unified, motionless nature, deduced from pure reason, find this powerful, non-trivial echo in the block universe interpretation of Einstein's 4D spacetime.
And consequently, the central pillars of Aristotle's hugely influential refutation look contingent, dependent on a pre-relativistic worldview. His rejection of the actual infinite, his insistence on separating space and time, his dismissal of a static reality as unphysical, these are all premises overturned or made highly questionable by the revolutions of the last 150 years. So, in that specific crucial sense, Aristotle's critique of Melissus's cosmology really can be considered unfounded from a modern physics perspective.
However, and this is the important nuance we keep coming back to, this conclusion has to be qualified. While Melissus's cosmology, the overall structure of reality, gets partial vindication, his strict metaphysical monism, that idea of a perfectly homogeneous, undifferentiated being that remains in tension with the structured, complex, information-rich universe modern science describes, Aristotle's challenge about plurality still has teeth.
Absolutely. But ultimately, this inquiry really resurrects the importance of Melissus of Samos, doesn't it? Long relegated to a historical footnote, maybe just a crude follower of Parmenides. His work emerges from this reevaluation as a vital, surprisingly modern contributor to the timeless dialogue on reality's fundamental nature. It just highlights how the deepest questions of philosophy persist through millennia, constantly reemerging, gaining new meaning in the powerful languages science gives us.
So as you go about your day, maybe look around and ask, what other ancient insights might modern science reilluminate next? What forgotten philosophers might suddenly find their ideas resonating with our latest discoveries? That's definitely something for you to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this episode of AI History of Western Philosophy.